Hi book friends, I'm Erin, and this is Erin Go Read. Sorry about my unusual background here. Not my bookshelves. We're in the hospital right now. My husband's in the hospital with sepsis, and so this is what we have to work with. He's currently right next to me here, sound asleep, sitting up in the chair. So I figured I would just take this little moment of time to do my October wrap-up finally. So October for me was Victober and a bit of Spookathon with a memoir thrown in there. So the first book I read for Victober was Gloriana, or the Revolution of 1900 by Lady Florence Dixie, and that was a real treat because it was so different. I have not read much Victorian literature yet, but it's certainly not what I would expect from Victorian literature, as we have basically like a feminist utopia is created. There was relationships and politics and self-identity, a murder mystery and adventure. There was so much that was involved in this book, and I thought it was really great. I read it on the Kindle, and the formatting of it, there were some issues I had with that, which I think detracted from my enjoyment. Also, I'm just not a very seasoned Kindle reader in general, or e-reader, and so I think I just generally have a little bit harder time with my enjoyment with something when I'm reading it as an e-copy, as opposed to the physical book or an audiobook. But ultimately, I gave that 4 stars, and I have seen you can get. I think it's through like the English Library or some national British source that you can get some sort of actual physical copy of it on Amazon. I saw that after the fact, and it was like $7-8. So if I had to do it again, I would get the physical copy of it. Also for Victober, and another 4-star read for me, was The Warden by Anthony Trollope. This is my first Anthony Trollope, and I am now reading the second book in the Barchester Chronicles, the Barchester Towers. And essentially we're looking at the lives of clergy and gentry and their families, and just the ins and outs of how things are run. And particularly in The Warden, we follow Mr. Harding, who is the warden, and he is the presenter at this the local church, or Barchester Cathedral, I think it is, and he is in charge of the hospital and the inhabitants of it. So in the past, John Hiram had I can't remember exactly who he was, but in his will, he had basically stated that he wanted to take care of some of the basically like the old men who were destitute and had no one to care for them. And so part of the finances of running the hospital was taking in 12 men, and then they were to each receive a certain amount of money as kind of their spending money, or whatever, money to take care of themselves. And they kind of had like room and board. And then the warden's job, the warden was given a certain income in order to take care of these men, and then also to do their presentership duties as well. And the fulfillment of John Hiram's will and this £800 a month that goes to the warden gets put into question. And essentially that's like the main conflict of the novel. And the young man who comes to town and challenges this. And then also what I really love about it is just how deeply Mr. Harding, how much Mr. Harding takes this to heart, and not just because he doesn't want to be wrong, like in the eyes of anyone else. He doesn't want to have been in the wrong, like to be guilty of something. Not just to be called guilty of something, but to have actually been guilty of something is what really eats at him. And then even when he is even when he is convinced that he is in the right, as far as that goes, there's the perception of everyone else, and how is he gonna ever have kind of a normal life with everyone thinking that he is like basically swindled people, or taken money that he shouldn't have taken, even though it was rightfully his. And then how also that will affect his daughter. So I listened to the audiobook of The Warden, and I'm now reading the physical book of Barchester Towers. I would love to reread The Warden in the future and underline. So there are some really quotable bits in this that I would love to have just kind of underlined for posterity's sake. My last Victober read was Wuthering this was 5 stars for me. This was a reread. I read this my senior year of high school, although I have basically no memory of it, and I loved it. I think, and I got this from Katie at Books and Things. The key, I think, to really getting this book and enjoying this book is to look at it as a revenge story and not as a love story. And the um, the depths of the character and their motivations and how they were raised and treated in the past affects how they treat others in the future, and just kind of their general trajectory in life. I also love how our Nellie, our narrator, is an unreliable narrator, and we get kind of a better glimpse of this. So there's a small portion of the story that's told by the housekeeper of Wuthering Heights versus the housekeeper of, I can't think of the name of it at the moment, but the other house, where Nellie is the housekeeper. And we get a little bit different view, like a different bias of certain characters. And I thought that was a really interesting look at how the story is, our perception of the characters is skewed based on the narrator. So 5 stars for Wuthering Heights. I am so far very much Team Bronte. Okay, for Spookathon, I read My Name is Monster by Katie Hale, and I love this cover. This is the only book I ended up reading for Spookathon, but it was a good one. So we have kind of a post-apocalyptic like setting, and our main character Monster had been working in the Seed Vault at the time of this great war that happened. There were bombs that like distributed some sort of sickness that ends up killing everyone. So as far as she knows, and she ends up like on a boat or swimming or something. She gets herself to Scotland, and she believes to be the only person who has survived. And we see her survival and then her kind of striving toward self-sufficiency and getting things back to some sense of normalcy, and kind of recreating a life, even though she's the only human. And then she encounters a little girl who then she names Monster, and when the little girl becomes Monster, she becomes Mother. And so we see the relationship between the two of them grow, and how now she has a companion, and she really thrives off of being Mother. And she says that Mother means creator and that Monster means survivor, and those two roles play a significant part in the way that in the way that each of them sees themselves and their relationship to each other. The thing I think I like the most about this is the role of language, and how Mother is kind of the keeper of language, particularly in the context of where they're living. And so Monster doesn't have the opportunity to learn words, ideas beyond what Mother teaches her. Yet somehow there are certain things that just seem kind of almost innate, and things like the sea that she just seems to know through this kind of collective consciousness about, and she starts to explore a little bit on her own. This is definitely not a book for someone who needs to have all the answers answered. There are all sorts of little possible tributaries that this book could have gone down, or tributaries that are peered at but then not explored. And if those not being resolved is going to drive you crazy, this is not the book for you. This book, I like the way that really goes into each of their characters, and particularly because we start off with Mother, the original Monster, being the narrator, and then it switches to young Monster being the narrator. So when we go to young Monster's point of view, we get more about her own perspective and her way of thinking, but we also get new insights into Mother that we didn't have previously, just because young Monster is a far more introspective and perceptive person than Mother is. So I gave this one 4 stars, maybe even 4.5, I think. So this was a really great read. And the last book I bought was I bought this on a whim, and I think I read it in 1 or 2 sittings. It's just It's just under 200 pages. This is a memoir, How We Fight for Our Lives by Saeed Jones. Now, my husband and I, he's now awake. Say hi, Sam. Really loud. 1, 2, 3. I don't know if you can hear that or not. Anyway, we've started writing a memoir about our lives, our love story, particularly in light of Sam's injury. If you don't know, Sam was hit by a roadside bomb in Iraq in 2007, and that is part of why we are in a hospital at the moment. So I've been looking more into memoirs, and I just happened to see this one. It was a new release, and it had blurbs from Roxane Gay, Marlon James, Jacqueline Woodson, and Keith Lehman. So those were all good. Those blurbs were part of the selling point for me to why to pick this one up in particular. And I read this so fast that the ending in particular really is what sticks out to me. But mostly this is the story of a young black man. I think he's in Florida, somewhere in the South. So I think he lives in Texas, but his grandma lives in Tennessee. So he's going back and forth between Tennessee and Texas through the points that he's recounting in this. And it's for his relationship with he and his mom, he and his grandmother who lives in Tennessee, him and religion, and being a young gay black man, and what that experience is, just trying to figure out himself. And then it really, towards the end of the book, really delves into his relationship with his mother, and it was just very, very readable. Like, I just couldn't stop reading, and I don't know if I have like a whole lot to say about it. I just really enjoyed it. The ending, I loved. I was in tears, not bawling, but I had a good cry toward the end of this book, and I gave this one 4 stars. So I think everything but Wuthering Heights got 4 stars, and I gave Wuthering Heights 5 stars this month. So these are the books, plus Gloriana, that I read this month. All of these books got 4 stars, except for Wuthering Heights, which I gave 5 stars, and I'm looking forward to reading again in the future. Thank you for watching. See you around the tubes.